Vikings chapter 6. As soon as breakfast was over, Tolly set off to his uncle's farm. After my grandmother and sister Kidda had cleared and washed the bowls and the cups, they went to the back room with my mother and my aunt. They were busy sewing several new tunics. Kidda had told me one was for me and one was for Tolly as going away presents. Meanwhile, my grandfather and brothers prepared to go hunting and fishing. And I went to the forge with my father and my uncle. As usual, I began my working day in the forge by adding wood to the fire, and then used bellows to fuel the flames. Today was an ordinary day though, because after today, I would own my very own sword. It was not usual for a boy like me to own a sword. Although my father was a carl, he was a carl. He could own land, have a business, he could fight, or he could trade. But he's not a jarl. A jarl was a member of the elite nobility. Swords, like the one my father was going to make for me, usually reserved for jarls. I had seen such swords swords carried by the nobles. As they arrived in our town to participate in the thing, the thing. The thing was held outdoors once a year. It was a time for Carls, like my father and my uncles, to sit together with Jarls to discuss issues, to settle disputes, to judge the crimes, and to make decisions about our community. Even though the Carls were a larger group, the Jarls had greater authority. As at one of these assemblies that it had been decided that 25 young men from our town should leave and go to Iceland. It was at the same meeting that Lord Toki announced that my father saved not only his life, but also the king's life. My father had uncovered a plot that people were planning to kill both Lord Toki and the king. He had overheard 2 spies talking in his workshop. My father prevented this terrible crime from happening. Then, to thank my father, Lord Toki wanted to give me a nobleman's sword. Once the fire in the sword was burning fiercely, my father was ready to begin. He explained to me many times that maintaining a strong fire, which wood was burned to the extreme temperatures, was the secret to being a good blacksmith. He told me the iron is only as good as the flames that shape it. Bjorn, I want you to pay close attention to everything that I do. You need to understand that making a strong sword is very difficult. It requires much skill, my father explained. I will, I said earnestly. And then he began. I watched carefully as my father bundled together bars of iron. As I watched, the heat from the flames warmed my skin. And it turned pink. And so later on, I was dripping with sweat. I watched my father as he worked carefully and intently. As soon as the iron bars softened and connected, my father used a variety of tools to draw out the metal into the length of a sword. He worked to weld. To weld the pieces of metal together. He pulled and stretched the metal, and he twisted it. Slowly, the shape of a sword began to appear. Do you see what happened, Bjorn? He asked, although I could tell that he didn't really expect an answer. The heating and the twisting of different kinds of metal has created a composite of iron that now has the necessary strength and flexibility for a sword blade. Yes, I see, I responded. My father placed the softened metal on the anvil and continued to twist, to hammer, and chisel, and file it into shape. And soon, as he was satisfied with the shape, I knew he would plunge the hot metal into a tub of cold water to cool it and harden it. Once the iron had cooled, then he would begin sharpen the blade. Although I did not yet know how to make a sword, I did know how to make spear points, axes, and nails, and knives, pots and pans. That much I already learned from my father. Father, I have already thought of a name for my sword, I said as he continued as I continued to watch him work. I want to name it Faux Biter. Faux Biter. Faux Biter, the name of his sword. My father looked up from his work. Yeah, that's a fitting name for a warrior's sword, he said seriously. This sword will serve you well. You can think of me and our family when you are called to use it. I looked at the sword for several moments and did not look up. I could feel the sweat and the tears merge into one steady flow of droplets that fell from my face to the floor. At that same moment that my father spoke to me, I wanted to stop time. Stop it completely so that I could stay with him forever. For the rest of the day, my father, my uncle, and we worked together in the workshop, heating and shaping and cooling the iron. From time to time, people would stop by to collect something my father or my uncle had made for them. They were paid in either silver coins, silver pieces, or other goods that my family could use. As the day wore on, my father and uncle began to talk about the evening storytelling that was scheduled to take place in the main marketplace. This was a common practice before events like weddings, festivals, or voyages. Poems of old were told by skalds. 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 So that we would know our history. It was thought to be important that these sagas or history stories be handed down throughout the generations and never forgotten. our town had two skalds who had committed to memory dozens of sagas about Viking history and adventures. One of the skalds will be traveling on the cargo ship with Tolly and me. He was charged with the responsibility of keeping the sagas alive in our new home. There was also a boy who lived on the same street as Tolly and me. And he had been an apprentice to the skald. He had already spent many months with him learning these poetic tales. He too would keep our history alive. So late in the afternoon, after eating dinner of fish, vegetables, and barley bread, instead of preparing to go to sleep for the night, my family, along with many others, they made its way to the marketplace at the center of the town. A large fire was in it, and many people were already seated around it. The two skalds sat upon a wooden platform beside the fire. Once everyone arrived and was settled, the first skald stood up and began to recite a saga of bravery and adventure. I looked into the eager faces of my father, of my family, and my friends. And their eyes were lit by the flickering flames of the fire. And I knew in my heart that this would be the last time that we would all sit together and listen to these old tales.